Is up to a little bit of interpretation. These numbers change a little bit each. I gotta look them up real quick. Human pregnancy has an average length, or human gestation, I guess, has an average. Look at it real quick. Gotta look it up. 8. We have 8. Yes, we are. It's got an average length of. Scroll down here. Here we go. 266 days. Average length. Human pregnancy.
So a little less than 9 months.
There we go. Now, you got to realize that these numbers are collated by physicians' records, essentially. Physicians have thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records together. That number is a little bit inaccurate, obviously, because you have to know exactly when day 0 was, the date of conception, which is tricky, obviously, it's tricky. So, 266 is a fair average. I've seen it vary a couple days on either side of that, but there's two. Debbie, please.
They're getting a little bit better with calculating.
Good.
Because I know the date of conception and the date that they calculated, and they're right on.
They're getting good, very good. So we are getting better with this. Very, very good. Very, very good. But you have to realize that some moms don't know exactly, and then there's some uncertainty built into that. But I think that's indicated in the standard deviation, which is about 16 days, according to my most recent check. Thank you, Naomi, for that. And I'm calling this pregnancy, gestation, pregnancy, whatever you want to call it. Pregnancy sounds more human than gestation. That sounds more.
What is 16 days?
The plus or minus around the average.
Okay. I thought.
Oh God, the sigma! I didn't draw it right again. I'm sorry, I didn't draw it right again. Hang on, hang on.
Thinking
There.
that I don't.
Sorry. Sigma. Fair enough? Okay. Now just stretch it. Just stretch it. Okay. So what I'm going to do over here, I'm going to come back to this curve. I'm going to leave this just as it is, yes? But I'm going to add another axis below that one with those numbers on it. So we can kind of do the same IQ analysis that we did before. And then I want to look at two things that interest me, including a text that came in from my swim coach today. So I want to talk about that too. But here is 266 days. Then we have a unit, days. Okay, days. Plus or minus 16. So now we've got to add 16 repeatedly and subtract 16 repeatedly. So add 16 would be what, 284? Did I do that right? 282. Did I do that right? I think I did. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, you're right.
Right, and then 16 again, 298.
Yeah.
16 again, this is getting ridiculous for the poor mother, yeah?
314.
314.
No.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Exactly, that's ridiculous to think about, but it exists. Andrew, back to your question. These numbers can go on forever, but realistically, they shouldn't, obviously. I mean, you can have a pregnancy of 1,000 days by this axis. I mean, you can, right? Numerically, that curve keeps going. But realistically, Scott's like, holy crap, three years of pregnancy, right? Yeah, realistically, it doesn't happen realistically. But numerically, it can happen. That's why your question is so hard to answer. As soon as you make it continuous and infinite, it recreates an impossible situation.
There was a woman over in India, and she had a miscarriage, but it never came out, and it calcified. And she
Oh, I've seen
gave
that.
birth to it 45 years later.
Screwed up.
Okay, time out.
Notice that.
Don't pull a Jared on me. Not saying it can't happen. Thank God we only hear about it once in 7 billion cases. Okay, back to this, because that kind of freaks me out a little bit. I carried a hernia around for 15 years. So I mean, it's not that hard to
45-year-old
believe.
baby.
Yeah.
But like a baby, like
I'm not saying it's not painful sounding. I'm just saying it doesn't surprise me that it can happen. Okay, what's one down? 250, yeah. And then down again would be, yeah, 234. And then 16 to 18. Thank you guys, thank you. Beautiful. So what I want to do is, I want to look at two situations, and they are the extremes of human pregnancy. I want to look at preemie births, and I want to look at induced births, because those are the things that interest me the most. And I'll talk about why both interest me momentarily. So the first, let's look at preemie births, okay? Preemie births. Now, what does a preemie birth mean? Premature birth. What does it mean when you hear that phrase?
They were born before they were fully developed.
Born before fully developed. So born too early, basically. Premature, born too early. What does that mean?
Before the 166 days?
Before...
266.
Well, but how far before? Good, thank you, Jenny. Yes, but I mean, at some point you have to cut off. Is 265, would 265 be weird?
No.
Or 264?
What about like by trimester?
I don't, so cut them in thirds? So where would be good? JC, I love this. The thing is nobody fully agrees on where the cutoff for preemies is.
I think it's when the lungs fully develop. So they can
Let's come back to that. Let's come back to
But
that.
it's
Here's
on
what,
each baby.
well, good. But here is I found one universal measure that seems to be used over and over again. JC, go ahead.
Because this is just another thought.
No, go ahead.
Because I was like 2 weeks early and I weighed only like 5 pounds.
You were 2 weeks early, but
you
check
could do it
this
by
out.
like weight too, like that
Right.
would be like a premature.
But did you hear what JC just said? She was 2 weeks early. Where would she fall on that curve? She's right there, isn't she? 2 weeks is 14 days. That's not even one standard deviation down from average.
Yeah.
You're actually fairly typical, being 2 weeks early. Because of the 16-day standard deviation is ridiculously wide if you think about it. 2 weeks plus on either side.
But then you could also say, because I'm not quite one standard deviation, but that's with the average of 266. Is that for this year?
That is for historical, as far as I've seen. Now Naomi's got a good point. That could be in flux.
Yeah, because you could calculate it for the year.
Absolutely. Well, you could as a percentage of the year,
Yeah.
for sure. But this is what I've seen kind of over and over again, if you will.
Yeah.
And here's one measure that I've seen for measuring preemies over and over again. The 5th percentile. That is the cutoff for preemie births. That's the cutoff. If you can beat the 5th percentile, you're not preemie anymore. Which means I think that's tied to lung development. I don't know for sure. We'll come back to that because that actually hits, like I said, I got a text today that will tie into this. And I'm curious to see where this ties in with what I got today. This is the cutoff. So this is like cut off. This is the cutoff for pre. So this is like the Mensa problem, but reversed. The Mensa problem, you have to be in the top 2%. For preemies, you got to be in the bottom 5%. So it's a pure percentile. So, first question I have for you guys. If I want to know what that cutoff is, which I want to know, what kind of problem is it? Vote for backwards. A second for backwards. All in favor of backwards. Good. How can you tell us a backwards problem? Because I gave you a percentage of 5%. We start here. If you were looking for a percentage, you have to start down here. Okay? So you have a percentage given. The first thing we have to do is run that bad boy through the TI to figure out where it's going to be. Now, I think we already know the answer to this, to some degree. I think we know the answer to this already, but we'll run through for practice anyway. I guess we'll just leave that up. There we go. All right. So a percentile, if we're running this bad boy, is backwards for sure. We're going to shade left. I think that makes the most sense because we're getting the 5th percentile. 0.05 as a decimal, yes? There we go. There it is. 1.64. Negative 1.64 standard deviations. All right. So now we know. We know that the 5th percentile is right about here. That's going to put 5% down in this tail. What's the matter, Michael?
Nothing.
Nothing? You sure?
I'm sure.
Okay, I've been misreading faces all day. 244 was doing the entire class. So now we know that the z-score that we need to use is negative 1.64. And that's great. But because we live in America, you can't tell the mothers or the fathers or the families or the practitioners for that matter, okay, 1.64 standard deviations down, you're a preemie. What do they need to hear?
How many days?
How many days? Give them a day. Give them a day based on that average of 266 and a standard deviation of 16. Michael, go ahead. What's on your mind now?
The face I was giving you isn't 2 standard deviations usually 95%?
Oh, hold that thought.
Would be
Yes, but
2.5%.
yes, that's the difference. The difference, as Michael pointed out, thank you. I should have made that connection. Michael said, wait a minute, 5% is the opposite of 95%, which would be 2 standard deviations. But that 2 standard deviations is balanced around the average, so you put 2.5 and 2.5 outside of it. This is what's called a one-sided 95% confidence interval, where you shove the entire 95% to one side and have all the other area on the left side. We use this all the time in 244 as well. Sometimes you want 2 sides, but sometimes you want to see, for example, me and Max just recently tested whether or not cantilever brakes or V-brakes operated better on my bicycle for stopping power. We discovered that V-brakes work better, as I thought they would, but we tested them using this to see if V-brakes worked better, not worse. Not just different, better. And that's why you want better or worse, you want one side of it. And this is 244, we have 244-ish here, right? I don't mean to scare you off. But that's what 244 does all the time. So that's why it shifts, it's not quite at -2, because all the area that was between -2 and 1.64 gets picked up from over here and dropped over here, and then the curve moves over. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Good, very good. All right, so we tell our anxious parents, well, we got to turn that -1.64 into some kind of a day. Number of days, as Natalie said. Took some blue so it stands out a little better. So we come down here, we need to cut off x. X is number of days. Average is 266, but we're coming down from that, which is indicated by the -1.64 times 16. I'm going to guess that's about 24. What do we get, like?
239.76.
239.76? How about we call it 240? Yes? Here's your cutoff. It's 26 days down, yeah? It's 26 days down from average. Because you're down 240 from 266, so you're down 26 days. Which is 1.5 standard deviations. And that's the whole point, 1.6 standard deviation. That's the whole point of this number. It's telling you how many of those 16s you're coming down from average. This is why I got so nervous when my buddy sent me his text today, because his baby was born 6 weeks, or went to labor 6 weeks early. And I'm like doing this math in my head, I'm like, okay. There's tools to deal with this situation. But it's scary because, as Kate said, lungs aren't developed at 6 weeks early. Right? I think, anyway, from what I remember.
I'm doing that right now.
You're doing that right now? Oh, good for you, good for you. But these kinds of things make me nervous because I'm like, oh God, like this is why we have incubators and the NICU and all that wonderful stuff. But when it hits close to home and it hits a friend, it's like, ooh, that's when you start nervous. And again, this number could be a false positive because this is all based on 266.16. What if it's not 266.16? What if it's 266.8? What if it's 266.20? See what I'm getting at here, friends? If we change this number, this percentile changes. This percentile changes because the number right there is going to change, yeah? The number right there is going to change. JC, go!
So would you say we would just use the terms like on average?
Yes, that you have to.
Because we cannot calculate under the margin of error because we don't know.
Well, the thing is, that's an average length of pregnancy for all women. I'm sure, and I don't know the numbers on it, I'm sure it varies from region to region or from ethnicity to ethnicity. I'm sure it varies from gender to gender too. But I'm sure there's variables that aren't being, this is a worldwide average, or at least a US-wide average. So yeah, I would guarantee there must be some variance built into it. And I'm sure that nurses know that and doctors know that. But this is just an overwash, if that makes sense. Yes, it is an average for sure. And as such needs to be, that's why I pulled back a little bit from getting nervous for my buddy and his wife, because I'm like, okay, it's an average, it might not be anything, Go ahead, Kate.
According to WebMD and a couple other ones, at 35 weeks, they're almost fully, so probably...
What's 35 times 7?
245.
Very close.
There you go. So I'm guessing this is why 240 is pretty close to the 245. There's your almost fully developed 245, so there's your 240. It's close. It's got noise, as Naomi pointed out, it's got some noise built into it, but at the same time, I think it's a pretty close estimate.
Well, because, if babies are born with jaundice.
Exactly. Jaundice is the vitamin C deficiency, is that right?
Yeah, it's not as big of a deal, but if the baby can't breathe on its own.
Yes. Well, that's where the little NICU breathers come in, and that just, it breaks your heart, makes you go, oh, it's so cute, and it breaks your heart at the same time.
Yeah. I think it's the definition of preemie is kind of, it's a weight with relation to if they can breathe on their own, because some babies can breathe just fine, but if they're born in a 2.5, 3 pound baby,
Yes.
they still need.
Of course, yes. And I think that ties in what JC was saying, is this is all based on an average. Because it's amazing how often the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile come into medical lexical use. I mean, very often, I forget what my doctor said about obesity rates. It's tied to a percentile, like the top 5 or top 10%. I think it was top 5 actually. Anything above the 95th percentile, you're then tagged for obesity. If you're, remember we talked about this before with Max. The definitions obviously changed because Max was in the 80th when he was flagged as possible. But when it gets above the 95th, that's when it's like a control chart. Like automatically, that's like, okay, your kid's obese. Which is stupid if you look at all the data points.
Max got a big
But
head.
that's a big head, a lot of hair. His hair weighs 20% of his body. Yeah.
Back in the beginning of the term, you discussed that we were going to talk about the amniocentesis of the state.
That's your last project.
Is it? Okay.
That's in your last project, yes ma'am. And you're going to see why math calmed down my neighbor because of her amnio results. Yes, that's false positives. Yeah, pretty cool and pretty disturbing all at the same time. But I do have one more thing I wanted to ask you about. And that was the other side of preemie births, which are the induced births, right? Because this is the interesting thing. Here's something I noticed. Here's something I noticed. Moved to Bend, 04. About 10 years-ish. Every woman that got pregnant and gave birth in my neighborhood between 04 and when I stopped keeping track, which was about 08, 09, every single one, because we talk, because we're a neighborhood, we talk with this, every one of them was induced except one. So that was about 8 or 9 pregnancies that went to induction. So 8 of 9 or 9 of 10, I forget what it was. A lot of kids in the neighborhood running around. It's a nice little neighborhood. Talk to each other about this stuff. I thought that was ridiculous. Why are 80 or 90% of births getting induced? I mean, if the human body is functioning properly, you would think, now I'm also of the opinion that eventually the human body is going to evolve some kind of a zipper mechanism. Honestly, I am. For the sake of mothers everywhere, you unzip, take the baby out, zip back up, call it good. I don't know, make it bikini shaped, I don't know, whatever. But I think we're eventually going to evolve something like that. Give us 10,000 years, the knee's going to be a better joint, we'll have a zipper. But the idea is, I think it's weird that induction happens so frequently. Now, granted, it was a horrible sample, yes? Just the women in my neighborhood. But then as my wife would ask around, Jenny, go.
Well, just because I work there and I see how many women are induced,
Good.
the surgeons allow them, or the OBGYNs, up to 2 weeks within.
And I believe yes! Boom! Labor
So
is usually induced
they
if we
give
go
them a
past
choice.
2 weeks.
Yeah, even before, if it's 2 weeks before they're
They allow them, right?
Yeah,
But
they say
the
cut
thing
them.
is if they get to 2 weeks, boom, they're cut.
Yes.
And that's what we're pulling. Good. I'm glad this. I like it when I get because this is kind of weird. These numbers are a little bit kind of in flux, but I like it when we get reassurance from the profession. Good. So here's the deal. Let's shift it now from preemie births to induced births. Same average, same standard deviation. I almost got an official with a midwife about this once. It was my class. She's like, "That's wrong." I'm like, "Okay." I mean, the calculations aren't wrong based on the numbers. She's like, "Yes, it is." I'm like, "Watch
And when
it."
you've been waiting 9 months, you don't want to wait another 2 weeks.
Or another 2 days.
Yeah,
for
you
that
want it
matter.
out now.
Seriously, I see. That's why the zipper is a good idea. So now we're going to go with induced births. Now, what Jenny just said, you laugh. I'm patent that idea. So induced births. The idea is if the birth goes 2 weeks past average, the baby comes out by induction. Okay. So if we go 2 weeks past average or past due date, let's use due date. Now, of course, by this definition, no pregnancy will ever go more than 14 days past 266, which would be 280. But that doesn't mean that a birth doesn't think it's going to take more than that, if that makes sense. Remember we were joking earlier about the 298 and the 314? I mean, now it gets ridiculous past the point, but 298 might not be that far off realistic. There might be a birth that thinks it needs to take almost 300 days to fully cook, right? So the idea, that's 10 months, right? That's the 10 months-ish. Maybe there's a fetus somewhere that needs 10 months to cook. But, by this definition of induction, it's not going to happen because 14 days past it gets pulled out. And there's all kinds of reasons for leaving feti in too long. I learned about a few of them. If they start actually having bowel movements and things, or negatively influencing the mother at that point, and if you influence the mother, you influence the fetus, and there's all kinds of good reasons for it. But by this definition, we have to deal with, say that again? You gotta pull the plug out of the oven. Turkey's done. So the question is, what percentage are induced? What percentage are induced births? That's the question I have, because my question stems from personal experience. I saw 8 of 9 or 9 of 10, and I can't remember the figures, that was 1 less than the number. And my wife would have been 2 less, because she didn't get induced. She was ready. It's the baby out of me. You can see Max, the head, you can see why. Out. So, is it unusual? I don't know. The question is, what percent should be induced? Once I know what it should be, then I can compare my 80% or 90% to it. So, let's figure it out, shall we? What kind of problem? Vote for forward from Natalie? Second? So got a second from Scott? All in favor? How do you know it's a forwards problem? Because we're looking for a percentage, Heather. Yes, we are looking for a percentage. What percentage are? That means I have to have a raw score given somewhere in the problem, don't I? Am I given a raw score somewhere in the problem? Indeed. Natalie's already figured it out for us. We have given the raw score. We'll go with green here. We've been given the raw score of 2 weeks past the due date. The due date was 266. 2 weeks past is 280. Right about there, yeah? Ish. There's 280. Here is the area we're looking for. That looks like a lot of area to me. Yeah? That looks like a lot of area. It's less than 50%, but I'm not sure exactly what percentage it is. Any guesses as to what that is before you actually calculate it?
35.
35? And remember, of course, I drew the curve, so that's suspect right there. So we'll go with 35. About a third. 1 and 3-ish. 1 and 3. Let's hold that thought, okay, Michael? Any other, might be too hard because my drawing skills aren't that great. So we'll just go with 1 and 3 as a guesstimate. Okay, well, that's fantastic, but in order to figure out what that is, because 180 is down here, right? What do we now have to do? Got the raw score. Next, convert it to a z-score. Run the formula, the forwards formula. So we got to come over here and convert to a z by doing, I put 180, that should be 280. My apologies, friends. That should be a 280, my apologies. It should be a 280 minus 266 over 14 over 16. I'm doing the math in my head now. I'm getting ahead of myself, I apologize. So 280 minus 266 gives us 14 exactly, because that's what it should be. It's 14 days over. Over 16, which is about, what is that, 88%-ish?
Yeah.
I think it's 0.875 if you change to a fraction. 7/8. That's almost, if you think about it, that's where JC was, right? On the other side of the curve. Right? You were saying you were 2 weeks under. There's 2 weeks over. It's symmetrically just as likely. So that this is telling me, this is weird. To me, this doesn't seem unusual. Induction to me seems like it should be an unusual event. But it's not, based on this. So let's figure it out. Now we've got it. We've got our z-score. Run it through and get the percentage. Okay? You guys told me it's forward, yes?
Yes.
Yes. So it's forward. We're going right, I believe. Left bound is 0.88 or 0.875, whatever you want to use. Whoops. Here we go. There we go. You can see it down there. It's 19%. 1 in 5. Not bad for the 1 in 3. 1 in 5. That tells me that out of every 5 pregnancies, 1 should be induced by this definition. So how do I explain to people in my neighborhood? I can't.
They all wanted to have their baby in one specific month, so they said, quick, pull the plug now.
Maybe. Possible. Very possible. It's possible that apparently there's some choice, yes? As Jenny just said, there's some choice to it. Once they get past a certain point after term, between term and 14 days, they can pick, or the doctors can pick to, that's, do it.
As long as it's like 2 weeks before, they have
There we
a
go.
2-week cutoff.
There's a window of opportunity,
Yeah,
so to
they
speak,
can
before it
choose.
becomes an automatic.
Yeah.
So there's a window, so it sounds like to me, and this is my interpretation, there's a preemie date, then there's a cutoff that preemie is no longer an issue, and then it's like normal development, and then it's somewhere in there's a window of, okay, you can induce now if you want to, or you can go to term.
Which most women want to.
Right, of course, get it done. And then you said most women want to induce or want to let go.
Want to induce.
Well, there you go. That might explain my neighborhood. If most women, and now Jenny's got more experience obviously than me because you work at the hospital. If most women want to induce, that could explain the women in my neighborhood. Yeah? I never asked them, well, you were induced because you had to be or because you wanted to be? Because I get slapped. Obviously, that's a private question. But they just told me we got induced. So therefore, maybe that's why. Maybe that explains it. Because it should be 20%, not 90%. But maybe that's why. If most women want to induce, then maybe that explains it. Boom! First data point I've ever gotten. I now have a potential answer for my question I've been asking for 5 years.
Do you want to carry something around any longer than you have to?
Exactly.
I'm not saying mothers aren't saints. I'm asking a mathematical question as to why 20% is so different than 90%. That's what I'm asking. Don't get me wrong, moms of the world. I'm just curious. I'm curious about this kind of thing, that's all. I'm just curious. Hate me. Does that make sense? Yes? Is that okay? So what's interesting about this is as long as the problems are bell-shaped, as long as the distributions of them, and things like IQ and birth are, you can apply this. You can apply this and standardize and answer questions. Believable? Please, JC, go, please.
So to determine if it's to the right or to the left,
Yes.
when we do like the problem we just did,
Excellent.
if the z-score would have been negative, then it would have been to
The left, yes ma'am, because we're left of average. Now, JC asked a very good question, and you're getting into 240, you take 244? Beautiful. It's getting into 244. One of the things that drives 244 students nuts, is that the next class you take is even more reading than this class. There's even less math, believe it or not. There's even less math in 244 than 243. But what makes up for the math is I give you blocks of text and you have to extract stuff from the text, which I think is realistic. That's what you do in your careers anyway. But you have to look for keywords like exceeds, outside of, different than, less than, decreased. And that tells you where you are in the curve. We're getting at that now. Go ahead.
I took a speech, it was like a 240 class a couple of terms ago online, and it reminds me a lot of statistics because we're analyzing the different language that
Yes.
people are using to portray
Yes.
society.
Yes.
So,
And it's amazing how that language is misconstrued.
and that's
Yes.
exactly what my class was about.
It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me when, I mean, I told you the story about the healthcare, right? Student healthcare and insurance. Yeah, it's amazing to me. Basic mathematics and basic English gets misconstrued. And I think a lot of that deals with the fear of mathematics education in this country. People are afraid of math because they don't think they're good at it, because they've always failed at it. I work very hard to undo that. And then also put stuff in, look at back what we've done today. It's like, holy crap, amazing stuff we've done today. But we're overcoming that plus adding more to it. So I'm glad that you've seen it in other places. That's why I like talking to Tony and seeing what he's doing in the process. We're all kind of fighting the same battle, if you will. I'd like to leave you with another way to use z-scores. Don't write this down. I'll have this all posted for you after class is over. But this is an interesting one because, let me start and stop again. You can use z-scores